History Through Fiction, the podcast. I'm your host, Colin Mustful, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Gabriella Saab, author of The Star Society. Gabriella, hello.
Good morning, Colin. Thank you for having me.
Of course. I want to start with Audrey Hepburn. This story is loosely based on her life. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about her actual biography here and then how you use that to create these
Sure.
characters?
Absolutely. So Audrey Hepburn is one of my favorite actresses and has been since I was little. And she came to fame in the 1950s, really, with Roman Holiday being her first major role in the United States. But during her early life, she actually grew up in the Netherlands, what we know today as the Netherlands. She was born in Belgium, raised in Holland. And so during the war years, and, in the 1940s, she was a child living in occupied Arnhem and Velp, which is kind of near Amsterdam, if I remember correctly. And so just in learning about her, just as a fan of who she was, I kind of stumbled upon that part of her life. And I thought it was really interesting because like most people during that time, she didn't really talk about the war. She didn't, want to relive that part of her life. But she was actually involved in the Dutch resistance. She was training to be a ballerina as a child. She wanted to go professional. And so she would dance to raise money for the Dutch resistance. She would deliver messages for them. She would help downed pilots in the area. So she really did a lot of good for the cause. And this is while, they're occupied by the Nazis. There's a lot of starvation happening around her, and she suffered the effects of malnutrition as well, which kind of affected her dreams of becoming a dancer. So from there, she kind of turned to acting. And I thought that was so interesting to go from she was a very private woman. Even, when she became so famous, she kind of preferred to be at home, to be with her family, to be with her pets, and she was just very quiet, very introverted. Um, so I thought, what would that be like to go from a life like that, where she was surviving something so horrific, to then becoming this public figure known for her talent and her fashion and her beauty and everything we think of today when we think of Audrey Hepburn. And as someone who didn't really like the spotlight. So that's kind of what I wanted to explore through the Star Society. So I have a character named Ada who is inspired more by that journey from the Netherlands to America. As far as I know, Audrey Hepburn was not swept up in the Red Scare as my characters are, but I just really wanted to see what that would be like to go from occupied Netherlands, World War II, to the becoming this big famous star when you're someone who is kind of more private and in my character's case has some things to hide.
So in this story, you have Ada, who based on Audrey's journey, but she has a twin sister, Ingrid. And of
Correct.
course, I mean, you have a very compelling sister story here. Can you kind of go
Thank
into
you.
detail about the differences between these two sisters and how they become reacquainted?
Yes, absolutely. So I wanted two very different sisters who were still very close because, I have sisters. I know what that bond is like. So I thought as close as they can get as twin sisters. And so we have Ada, who is very artistic, very into dance and theater and acting. And then Ingrid is kind of her foil. She is more into history and politics and literature and just kind of, more literal about things and wants to know what's going on in the world and what's happening versus Ada is kind of more escapist. So they're very different in that regard, but very close, very loyal to each other. And so during the war, Ingrid is engaged to a man who is drafted into the Dutch army and then is at risk of conscription into the German army when the Netherlands fall. So to protect him, Ada kind of convinces her to flee with him and they go to America so he won't, be subjected to that. So that's how the sisters get separated. And so, they're thinking this will be temporary, we'll reconnect after the war. But then we all know what happens during war, people lose touch and trauma happens and difficulties happen. And so they lose touch with each other and each kind of fear the worst. And so Ingrid is in America all that time. She gets involved in private investigation and is very involved in, just the political climate going on at the time, while Ada has stayed in the Netherlands to help the resistance. And so they end up reconnecting post-war when Ingrid is hired. Her company is hired by the House Un-American Activities Committee to investigate the rise of communism in the entertainment industry. And one of the people on kind of HUAC's radar is an actress named Ada Worthington Fox. And when Ingrid sees that file, she realizes this is her sister under a new name. She's changed her identity. She's become a totally new person. And so Ingrid wants to get to the bottom of what's going on. And so she's like, I need to go there and, first of all, reconnect because it's her sister. So she's, of course, delighted that her sister is okay. But then she wants to help her and kind of shield her from everything that's going on and, kind of lead her back onto the straight and narrow if she strayed off. And so Ingrid feels very responsible for her and for that. And so they reconnect through that assignment.
And she kind of is she surreptitiously investigating her as well?
She is, yes. So Ingrid is actually there to find out where Ada's loyalties lie. And Ada, of course, knows none of this because it's private investigation. They're not allowed to say what's going on and what they're really doing. And in the entertainment industry at the time, they kind of had heard whispers of communist influences. People thought they were being inserted into films and into writing and scripts. And the actors didn't really find that all that concerning because they thought, a film goes through so many different stages of production. So even if somebody were trying to insert their own personal views into a story, it's going to get noticed somewhere and edited out at some point. So the actors were like, this is all just kind of getting overblown. We don't need to worry about this. And this is in the 1940s. And so we kind of think of the Red Scare more firmly in the 50s when it had really taken hold. But this was the very beginning where it was kind of starting to come up and those concerns were starting to rise. People were getting paranoid. And so we kind of see how that unfolds and increases and kind of that shift in the entertainment industry when the actors are and entertainment professionals are realizing this is going to be a little bit bigger of a deal than we thought it was. So Ada's of course aware of what's going on, but she's like, I don't need to worry about that. I don't need to say anything. She also is an actress who is she's known for her privacy, like that's her reputation in Hollywood, so people know she doesn't talk about her personal life. So she thinks it doesn't affect me because people aren't expecting to know where I stand on this. I don't need to address anything. I can just keep doing my thing and it's going to all blow over. And Ingrid's the opposite. She says, no, you need to be very clear about where you stand because this is all a lot more serious than you think it is.
And what did you learn about post-war Hollywood, the glitz and the glamour, and kind of the outside influence of Hollywood and the names it produced? What did you
Yeah.
discover about that era?
Oh my gosh. It was so much fun to just immerse myself in the golden age of Hollywood and learn, of course, about so many people that we know from that time, familiar names and familiar faces whose films I've watched and careers I've admired and things like that. But honestly, the way communism affected Hollywood, I really was not aware of. I kind of vaguely had heard of the Hollywood 10, which for those who don't know, it was a group of 10 men who were called to go to a hearing before HUAC and they refused and, cited their First Amendment rights for their reason for their refusal. And it turned into this really big deal. They went to trial and there was just all this drama surrounding that. So I kind of had vaguely heard about that, but I did not know, how gradual this process was, how big of an issue it became, how one of the Hollywood 10, Dalton Trumbo, actually wrote Roman Holiday, which was Audrey Hepburn's big break. And he wrote it under a different writer's name because a lot of writers were lending their names as fronts for these men who had been blacklisted and women, of course, who had been blacklisted. Because that's what happened. Basically, this caused this big blacklist in Hollywood. So people who were associated with the hearings and with communism and anything else, nobody wanted to associate with them or work with them, even if they had been found innocent or whatever you want to call it. Just any sort of association with that world just made people very, very nervous and they didn't want to get involved. And so that was really interesting to me because I didn't know much about that at all before I wrote this book.
I'd like to pick your brain a little bit about your craft.
Yeah.
So you've a lot of very interesting pieces to fit together here. Of course, there's a history, World War II in the Netherlands, and then post-war in the US. And then you have these two characters, both with secrets, both kind of figuring each other out. Uh, did you, obviously the history plays a really important role, but you had to know that backdrop in order to then create these pieces of fictional craft and fit those all together. So, how did it all come together into one plausible, enjoyable narrative?
Well, probably surprising no one, I am very much a plotter. So I like to have my whole story planned out before I put the first word on paper. So That means I do much of my research up front. I do all this work on character and plot and theme. So by the time I'm ready to write, I have a whole outline of the story, all this information on, my characters and their secrets and their goals and everything that's going to kind of inform their character arc. And then, of course, the history. And so as I write, things are coming up that I need to research further, or the character arcs are shifting a little bit. And so I'm kind of going back to my materials that I've spent all this time developing and kind of updating as I go. But because of that, it kind of becomes a very cohesive and, I don't want to say easy writing process, because writing's, it's never easy and things come up, but it helps me streamline my thoughts, get my head on straight, and kind of know what I'm trying to accomplish, what sort of history I'm trying to insert in this story, how the narrative needs to go together. So I can touch on all those points, as you mentioned. So that really helps me a lot. It makes my drafting process a lot easier than it would be if I were just starting with an idea and diving right into it. So that is really what saves me and what helps me keep everything together and keep it straight. And then once I draft, of course, I go back and do a very heavy edit, because as you draft, you learn even more about the story.
And being your third novel, are you finding you have a routine like 6 months for research, 6 months for drafting, 6 months for, something like that?
Yeah, a little. I mean, it differs for each book, of course, but yes, I usually spend at least a couple months on the research. And while I'm researching, I'm probably doing some character development at the same time, because, I pull a lot from the research to inform the characters, of course. And so in my research, I'm making notes like, oh, this would be a good thing for this character. Let me make sure I go add that so I know to come back to it. And I type all my notes up. I'm a big note taker. So I have by the end this giant searchable document, which is fantastic because I can just go in and look for certain things or leave myself comments and notes and kind of go back to certain points. So I do that, and then because of all that development, I probably spend at least 4 months on the front end developing. And again, it depends on the story. But because of that, I can draft really, really fast. And I'm kind of prefer to be a fast drafter because I'm a much better editor than I am a drafter. And so it's easier for me to have work on paper that I can then go back and edit. And because I've done all this development, I know where I'm going with it. And so it kind of saves me a little bit of cleanup. But I draft again, depending on the story. I think this one I drafted in about 6 weeks, 8 weeks maybe. So and then I go back and I spend at least a few months on a slow edit. So I draft quick and then I edit slow.
So you're doing like 2 to 3,000 words a day?
Yeah, usually, yes.
Wow.
Which again depends on the day and the story, but that's kind of where I tend to fall.
So this is your third novel. How would you say it's alike and different from your previous ones, The Last Checkmate and Daughters of Victory? Are you
Yeah.
establishing a certain theme or brand or
I think the theme and the brand is always going to be women in history and stories of women in history that we haven't heard before, and that we should know, because they were always there. And it's just a matter of finding those stories and bringing them to the forefront. So oftentimes, my characters, as with this book and as with my previous books, they're inspired by real women. The main character herself is probably going to be fictional, but her story is inspired by stories of other women I've read of during that time. So that's definitely the recurring theme. I always like to throw a few twists in there, so to keep the readers on their toes and kind of keep that undercurrent of mystery and kind of suspense, a little bit of thriller elements. So I would say in that case, it's a lot like my other two books, but of course it's very different in that it's a less heavy focus on war. The first two were more fully immersed in, World War II perspectively, and then the other one was World War II and the Russian Revolution. So this one, there is less focus on that, of course, because it's mostly taking place post-war and, of course, Hollywood. But we get a little bit of flashbacks to the Netherlands during World War II. But it was a lot of fun for me to kind of step outside of a more heavy war focus while still maintaining the things I love about history and about writing, and just kind of those deep emotional bonds, and those stories where hopefully the character is driving the story regardless of what's happening in the plot.
I'd like maybe a little more insight into the process for you. Did you have the same agent as before, and was it a difficult sell, or did it come easy this time around? How long was that process, and what was it like?
So I have had the same agent the whole time, which has been fantastic because, of course, by now I signed with her in, I guess it was early 2020. So we've known each other 5 years now. She knows how I work, I know how she works. So there's a lot of trust there, which is fantastic. So the concept itself was not a hard sell for her at all, which was great because I love getting to pitch these ideas to her and we can kind of bounce off each other. And if I'm struggling with the concept, she can help me kind of figure things out, which is great. So that's another big part of my process. I write the full synopsis and the pitch and probably a sample, maybe a couple chapters to send to her. I've already kind of discussed the concept with her, but then and I say, okay, I'm going to develop it more fully and I'm going to send it to you. Please go ahead and flag any potential issues you see. And so I can kind of have those in mind. Or if it's not working at all, then, I can do something different. And so that's a big part of my process also, getting her initial take on my full synopsis and my pitch and those kind of opening chapters. So she can say, this is looking great, but, this needs some help or strengthen this a little bit. So I can kind of have her initial thoughts in mind as I go into my drafting stage. Um, so that was wonderful, and then I did end up with a different publisher for this one because my old editor retired and, a lot of things happened in-house there. So that kind of made the process a little bit longer in terms of the sell, and we were kind of at a weird place in the market where World War II was tapering off a little bit. Nobody really knew where things were going. Hollywood was having a moment, so I was cautiously optimistic, but I still wasn't totally sure if this one was gonna land. But fortunately it did, so I am very grateful.
That's really interesting I mean, it's obviously this is a creative field, but there's so much just business steps
Yes,
involved. And
exactly, and things you can't really plan or predict for, you just have to roll with the punches.
so I saw that you started a Substack. I followed you, you followed me
Yes.
back.
Yay.
It looks like you're new on there. What are your plans? Like, what made you decide to join? Because I joined at the beginning of this year. We're speaking right now in
Okay.
November 2025. And I'm finding that I do like the platform and the long form content of it.
Yeah.
What inspired you to join it, and what are you thinking moving forward?
I'm excited for it. It's kind of been on my radar for a little while because I never had a newsletter, and it's something, every author should have a newsletter. I was bad and did not make one. So I was like, all right, I finally need to do something there. And a lot of the authors I follow use Substack. And so I really, like you, I liked the long form, option for it. The way they could post things like, just a quick newsletter or like a story or some craft talk. And so it was just kind of really, really interesting to me. And I found I just really enjoyed how it looked and the ease of it and the setup. And, of course, the fact that you can follow people. And it's kind of another version of social media, but for newsletters. And so I thought, all right, if I'm going to jump in with both feet to this whole idea of a newsletter, I think Substack is the way to go. It seems pretty straightforward, so I can hopefully figure it out. So I'm excited to be there. I've only done, I think, one post at this point. So I need to kind of figure out what I'm going to do in terms of how I'm going to schedule it, how often I'm going to do it. But I really like it, and I'm excited to see who else is on there and follow some people and learn a little more about it. I'm still kind of figuring it out, but I'm really, really excited for it. I think it's a great platform.
Nice. Yeah, I'm going to expand how I use it. I was just kind of feeling it out for this first year, but
Yeah,
it's a good platform where you can definitely find your audience there. So that's great.
exactly. That's awesome.
If you're comfortable, I want to ask you a little bit about your life outside of writing. I do a lot of interviews, and most authors have some personal aspects of their life on their bio or just somewhere. I don't see much about you. So, can you share some of your interests outside of writing? I'm sure you're not just sitting at your desk all the time.
I try not to be. Yeah, I live in the South, so I live in Alabama, so our weather tends to be pretty nice, which makes it really easy to get outdoors, and I live close to the beach, which is great. I have a Yorkshire Terrier, his name's Holly, and she is fantastic, and so I get out with her a lot, on walks and things. I love to bake and to cook. That's kind of my de-stress kind of hobby sometimes when I'm, deep in the thick of a book. I'll either take my dog on a walk or I'll go get in the kitchen and play around there. And as an extension of that, I love going out to eat and going to cocktail bars with friends and things. I'm in a supper club every week, which is awesome. And yeah, just
Wait,
hanging out
wait.
with friends.
What is a supper club?
Oh, I forgot. Not everybody's in the South. So a supper club is you can decide how often you meet, but for us, every single week we get together. In our case, the same girl hosts every week. Sometimes it's a rotating hostess situation. But it's our weekly supper club. And so she will make the main course and we will all bring sides, or maybe I'll make the main course and everybody else will bring sides. So you all bring a dish, kind of like a potluck, I guess. But we talk ahead of time so we know what dinner's going to be, what the main course is going to be. So then the rest of us can plan appetizers and desserts and drinks and things around the main course. For example, last time I brought the main course, I made a Lebanese dish because I'm Lebanese. And so I made that. And so everybody else, brought some hummus and things like that to kind of go with the meal. So it's a lot of fun. We all get together. It's me and a few of my really good friends and their spouses, and they have some small kids. So the kids all run around and play. And we hang out with them and we just all sit around and talk. And it's just kind of a great way to start our week and catch up. And it's always on Monday night. So it kind of gives us the push we need to get ready for a new week. And yeah, so it's fantastic. So that is my weekly supper club. So if you're not in a supper club, I highly recommend it. They're great.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of fun and
Yeah,
got a lot of interesting things you're doing. So that's great.
definitely.
Well, before I leave you here, maybe if we could just revisit the Star Society quickly. Obviously, it's kind of a fun twists and turns. We've got a lot of really fascinating history, but ultimately, what do you want readers to be able to take away, not just from, having this kind of fun read with a lot of interesting history, but beyond that, the real impact of the story for readers?
Yeah, well, as with all my books, I hope it encourages them to learn even more about the history and kind of sparks their interest and their curiosity. But more than that, it's ultimately a story of sisters and of sisterhood and of that loyalty and that bond and that connection where, regardless of what comes their way, they're going to be there for each other and they're going to, believe in each other. And so I really hope readers feel that emotional connection. And, even if you don't have a twin sister or a sibling, we all have those kinds of bonds with people in our lives, that closeness and that loyalty. So I hope they can see that kind of reflected in their own lives and in these characters, because that is ultimately, if I can move the reader emotionally and make them feel for these people and understand, even if they don't agree with what they're doing, just understand where they're coming from and try to sympathize and empathize. That is ultimately my goal with every single book I write. So I hope that's what readers take away from the Star Society.
Well, Gabriella, congratulations on the Star Society, and thanks so much for
Thank
joining
you.
me to talk about it today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Colin. This has been great.